Good evening. So we stop on discussing the relationship between learning outcome assessment test and the criteria we use in our rubric. So what we have said last time is that it's not only the assessment task, the nature of the assessment task that would be the basis of what criteria to put in a rubric, but rather we always go back to the learning outcome, meaning in this case, for example, we always align the nature of the assessment task on the learning outcome. For example, on this one, the learning outcome is for the student to critique. So one of the possibilities is that the aligned assessment task is a critique paper. But in terms of the criteria, we don't readily look at the nature of the assessment test, but rather we go first on the nature of the learning outcome. And so we've looked into the indicators of what would make us say that students can actually do critiquing. So for example, in this case, for me to say that students can critique, they should know how to establish a main claim, how to use evidences, how to analyze, and this should be articulated with clarity. Now, to complete this analysis or this discussion, we as teachers would be giving feedback to the assessment tasks of our students, and as the feedback that we would give should be targeted in terms of the areas that are needed to be to be given feedback. On this case, the criteria we set in our rubric, because again, the criteria we set in our rubric are the indicators that they can perform the learning outcome. And so when we give feedback, it should be aligned with the indicators of what would say that our students can actually perform the learning outcome. So in developing a rubric, to sum it up, we need to identify the qualities that are needed to be assessed and evaluated. So this would refer to the criteria for grading, and these are the indicators of the learning outcome. We should make descriptors of this criteria to categorize or make distinction between what an acceptable, satisfactory, and top level of learning outcome is. And we should therefore assign criteria or score level for each distinction. And so what we have been discussing since last week is that one lens that we can use in making a rubric and in making distinctions of the level of performance of our students is the solo taxonomy, from the pre-structural up to the extended level. We say that we can use this lens in developing our rubric if the student is not able to do the learning outcome as indicated by the criteria for grading. It's a pre-structural level. If the student is able to accomplish at least one aspect of the learning outcome, that's unistructural. Different aspects of the learning outcome, that's multi-structural. If they're able to relate different aspects of learning outcome together, that's relational level. But if they are able to go beyond what is expected from them, they are able to introduce new things, new ideas, new insights, that's an extended abstract level. So in this case, this example, the criteria for grading is standards of learning. Number 2 here represents the unistructural level. The number 3 represents the multi-structural level. Number 4 represents relational, and number 5 represents the abstract level. Again, in the unistructural level, the student is only able to accomplish one aspect of the learning outcome. The multi-structural level, it's able to accomplish two aspects of the learning outcome, which is the focus skill and the context, but it lacks in terms of clarity and relationship to one another. Once they are able to make clear the relationship of the context and the focus skill with one another, and it's already a SMART objective, that's the time that it is on the relational level. But here in this rubric, we are able to specify that it's not only that it should be smart, but rather it should target higher order thinking skills. That's our abstract level in terms of this example. Now, the next thing to do is, after developing your rubric and you have already given it to the students and the students are able to perform already, is for us to give feedback. Before we can actually discuss what comprises a good feedback, it's necessary that we first define what feedback is, because in our early discussion in this video, we are referring to feedback as a form of critiquing. But I think it's best that we consult the literature of what feedback is. So, based from the reading, we can extract what sets the difference on the view of teachers and students on how feedback is given, what are the roles of feedback, what makes feedback effective, and how is praise helping, or is it really helping. So, according to Wiggins, feedback is not about praise or blame. It's not about approval of or disapproval. The feedback would refer to an information that describes what the students did and did not do. It's supposed to help the students improve their performance. And likewise, there's no single study that could actually support the notion that a praise can improve students' performance. What the reading is saying is that it can make the student feel better or happier, but it does not really help in terms of improving students' performance because of the lack of substance and concreteness on pointing out what can be improved, which is basically what feedback is. It provides information on what things can be improved, and likewise what corrective measures can be done to improve students' level of performance. According to the reading, each learner requires unique feedback, and the feedback should be appropriate on different skill level. You cannot give an advanced level feedback to a beginning learner. What the reading is saying is that if the learner is a beginner, most likely the feedback that you would give is building on their base knowledge. If the learner is an intermediate one, most likely the type of feedback you would be giving are suggestions on on what strategies can be used to improve his level of performance. But if the learner is someone who is advanced in terms of the learning outcomes, what we can do is to recognize the effort and the time he gave, but likewise we give information of what could be the next level for him if he is an advanced learner. It's one characteristic of feedback to actually close the critical gap. The critical gap would refer to the distance between the expected learning outcome and what the learner is actually performing or exhibiting. Meaning, if this is the learning outcome and this is the actual performance of the student, the distance between what the student did and the learning outcome is the critical gap. The role of feedback is to lessen that critical gap, to approach or to decrease the distance between what the learner is actually doing to what is expected from him as or her as a learning outcome. It's important that feedback is concrete. It should be specific as much as possible. A question mark, a good job, praise would not work. It should emphasize what has been done and what should be done, what could be further improve students' performance. Another composition of feedback is you always go back to the goal. It's important that whenever you give feedback, it's clear to you as a teacher what are the learning outcomes or learning objectives that is targeted by this assessment task. And that's your reference in terms of determining what the critical gap is in relation to what the learner performed. Feedback provides information on what is next, what could be done, and it is also done in a positive and friendly climate. So here is an example of approaching or a method on giving feedback. It's the sandwich method. Sandwich method would be approaching feedback in such a way that it would give first a positive comment on an item done correctly, and then the next part of the feedback would be corrective comments on what needed improvement, and the last comment that will be given is another positive comment. So the pattern of the sandwich method is positive, negative, positive comment, or top bun, middle bun, or foundation bun. So, improving feedback, we need to clarify the goal. We need to bridge the gap. We need to give evidences on our comment. We need to point it out what makes this work good and what could be done for this output to become better. And it shows opportunity to improve work. For example, this is a one paragraph from an essay of a student. In terms of giving feedback, it could be, or it should be first referred, or we have a reference point in terms of the criteria for grading. Again, we give feedback based on the indicators that the learning outcomes can be performed, and that would be the rubric. So, in this case, I highlighted the sample part of the paragraph. Here is my feedback. Okay, the top one is a positive comment. We started by pointing out that we have different perspectives on activist people. The succeeding statements attempted to support this idea by stating why some are not happy about these people and why some do. So this is referring to a positive part of the student's submission. But the succeeding part is already a middle bun, which would refer now to what could probably be what part of the answer of the student would be needing improvement and cite. And likewise, it's pointing out which part of the student's output is manifesting the need for improvement. So, for example, on the continuing comment, this deviates the discussion from tackling activism as an idea that would create positive, or that would create or not positive results to discussion about people rallying. Since critical to be answered in this essay is, does activism or social movements create positive results? Shifting the focus of discussion from people rallying to the idea of activism can better address the question. If we would notice, this one highlighted in red is clarifying the goal. What's the goal of us, of the students answering this? Again, it's a good way to reorient the student of what is expected from him or her in terms of feedback. We always go back or remind our students what's the goal in answering this particular critical question. The next part is another part of the middle bun. It's bridging the gap. It's a corrective comment, meaning it's suggesting what can be done to improve students' work. For example, one way that this can be done is by explicitly defining what activism is in the context of this essay, and then explaining why some people agree with it and why some do not, or citing its pros and cons. This is more aligned than explaining why some people like who rallies and why some do not. So it's not just pointing out what is wrong, but it's suggesting what can be done to improve students' performance. Feedback would always end on a positive note. The question at the last part tries to bridge the first paragraph and the second one. This is a good attempt to maintain coherence of idea. So the sandwich method would always start on a positive note and would end on a positive note. Remember, unlike evaluation, which judges performance, feedback would always be the process of helping our students assess their performance. It's identifying the areas where they are right on target and provide them tips on what they can do in the future to improve in areas that need correcting. Feedback is our way of showing to our students that we are genuinely concerned to them and on their learning.